The beacon had been running for 307 years before I found it. I was not looking for it. I was cataloging pre-collapse emergency infrastructure. A grant-funded project, unglamorous, the kind of work that earns you a small office beneath the archive vault's glass dome, and the mere gratitude of exactly no one. The Orrakh Continuance had been rebuilding for 60 years, and the rebuilding had generated paperwork, and the paperwork had generated the need for people like me. Archivists who would sit in the thin morning light, filtering through restored dome glass, and work backward through the wreckage of what the collapse had interrupted. Most of what I found was inert. Decommissioned relays, voided treaties, emergency protocols that pointed to institutions that no longer existed. I found the beacon on a Tuesday. It was logged under Infrastructure Tier 7, Passive Automated Systems, lowest priority. And the file header told me it had been initialized in the 43rd year of the third continuance, 3 centuries and change before I was born. My ancestors had built it as a failsafe. If the homeworld went silent for more than 18 months, beacon would wake, assess, and if the silence held, fire a compressed distress burst at the nearest mutual aid signatory. The nearest mutual aid signatory at the time of initialization had been the Vorith Empire. The Vorith Empire had been dead for 212 years. I sat with that for a moment. Then I scrolled down. The beacon had fired 6 days ago. I remember the particular quality of stillness that settled over the cataloging chamber when I read that line. The dome light was very clear. Dust moved in it. I could hear the archive's climate system cycling through its morning sequence, the low hum of it, and the much quieter sound of my own breathing. The file was not misfiled. The timestamp was not corrupted. Beacon had assessed the situation. Vorith Empire status, dissolved, 212 years prior, and had recalculated. It had searched its mutual aid registry for the next available signatory. It had found one. It had fired. I pulled up the signatory list. Entry read, Earth Compact Pre-Diaspora Mutual Aid Accord, signatory status, active. The words sat there in the clean archival font my office used for everything, indifferent to the fact that it should not have been there, that the Earth Compact's status in our records had been listed as unknown presumed lapsed since before the collapse, that no one in the continuance had verified it in living memory because verifying it had not seemed important. The beacon had not cared about any of that. The beacon had been built to find a signatory, and it had found one, and it had fired a 3-century-old distress call at a civilization we had not spoken to in longer than most of our current institutions had existed. I filed an urgent query with the Continuance's Office of External Relations. Then I went to make tea, because there was nothing else sensible to do. The response from External Relations arrived before the water boiled. It was 2 sentences. First sentence said that no outbound communication to Earth had been authorized by the Continuance in the current administrative cycle. The second sentence said that an unregistered hull had entered standard orbit 40 minutes ago and was hailing on a frequency listed in the pre-collapse emergency band. And did I have any context? I took my tea back to my desk. The hull was transmitting on the old mutual aid channel, a frequency we had kept open out of archival habit, because decommissioning it would have required a filing I had never gotten around to submitting. I routed the signal through the vault's communication panel, the secondary one behind the cataloging desk, which I had never used except testing the system annually to confirm it still functioned. The voice that came through was human. I knew it was human because I had processed enough pre-collapse contact logs to recognize the cadence, that particular flatness, the way they compressed information into short declarative units as though every word cost something. The captain identified herself as Warrant Officer Priya Anand, commanding the patrol frigate Unbroken Claws, registry number and relay assignment following. She said they had received a distress burst 6 days ago on the pre-diaspora mutual aid frequency, logged to their relay's active response queue. She said they had been in transit for 41 days. I did the arithmetic twice, because the first time I did not believe it. The beacon had fired 6 days ago. The frigate had been in transit for 41 days. That meant the humans had departed 35 days before the beacon fired, which meant they had departed in response to the beacon's preliminary alert signal The low-power advance notice the system sent 72 hours before the main burst, which I had not known the system sent, because that function was documented in a sub-appendix of the beacon's technical manual that I had not yet catalogued. They had left 35 days before I even knew there was a beacon. I asked Warrant Officer Anand to wait and spent 40 minutes pulling the relay record. It was not a short file. The Earth relay designated in our mutual aid accord, the one that had received our beacon signal, had been established in the same period as our own beacon, three centuries ago, when both our civilizations had been newer and more cautious and had thought it wise to build redundancies. The relay was automated. It sat in a fixed position at the edge of what had been a busy trade corridor and was now a very quiet stretch of nothing in particular, and it had been listening, without interruption, for 307 years. Found its maintenance logs. The humans had serviced it 43 times over that period. The last service entry was 11 years ago. An engineer named OC had performed a routine calibration, noted that the relay's response queue was clear, filed the paperwork, and returned to wherever engineers returned to when they were done. The entry after that was 6 days ago. Incoming signal, pre-diaspora mutual aid accord, Orrakh Continuance. Dispatching response vessel, per standing protocol. Per standing protocol. I sat in the dome light for a while after reading that. The Continuance had spent 60 years rebuilding from the collapse. 60 years of deciding which old systems to restore, which treaties to honor, which infrastructure to maintain, and which to let go quiet. The beacon had survived because someone in the first decade of the rebuilding had decided it was worth keeping. The mutual aid accord had survived because no one had formally voided it, and not formally voiding something is its own kind of decision. I had not known when I found the beacon that morning that there was a human relay on the other end of it. I had not known that the relay had a response queue. I had not known that the response queue had a protocol. I had not known that the protocol still had a ship assigned to it. I reopened the channel. Warrant Officer Anand was still there. I had the impression she was used to waiting, that waiting was a professional competency her work required, and I told her what I had found. I told her the beacon had auto-fired on schedule, that the crisis it had been built to signal had occurred and resolved 2 centuries before her grandparents were born, that there was no emergency, that the distress call had been answered by the wrong civilization anyway, because its intended recipient no longer existed. I was sorry she had traveled 41 days. There was a short pause. We noted the Vorath Empire's dissolution in the relay log, she said. Protocol doesn't include an exception for that. Signal comes in, we send a ship. That's what the queue is for. I looked at the relay record again. I found the section she meant. There was no exception. The protocol was 4 lines. Signal received. Dispatch vessel. Vessel dispatches. Proceed to origin coordinates. Arrival. Assess and report. Report. File to relay log. 4 lines. 3 centuries old. No amendment ever submitted. You traveled 41 days, I said, because the protocol had no exception. We were in the sector, she said. 41 days isn't unusual for this route. Another pause, the careful kind. Is there anything you need? We carry a standard resupply complement, medical, structural assessment team, emergency rations. We don't know what the beacon was flagging. I looked around the cataloging chamber. The dome light was moving into mid-morning, warming from its early blue towards something closer to gold. The archive climate system had completed its morning cycle and gone quiet. On my desk were 307 years of accumulated infrastructure records, most of them inert, decommissioned, pointing at institutions that no longer existed. The crisis was 2 centuries ago, I said. We've rebuilt. I can see that from here, she said. Atmospheric readings look good. The city grid looks intact. The flatness in her voice did not change, but there was something underneath it I could not quite name. Not warmth, exactly. Something more like the tone of a person who has done a job correctly and is noting the fact without requiring acknowledgement. We'll file a completion report to the relay log and update the queue status. If you want, I can have our communications officer send you the relay's full history. Everything logged since initialization. Might be useful for your records. Yes, I said. Please. The file arrived while she was still in orbit. It was larger than I expected. The relay had logged every hour of its operation since the day it was switched on. Atmospheric readings, background signal levels, twice yearly human service visits, the long intervals of nothing in particular. It had logged 17 other distress signals from other civilizations over 3 centuries, none of them ours, and had dispatched ships in response to all 17. It had logged our beacon's preliminary alert 35 days ago with the notation Orrakh Continuance, accord status verified. Q activated and dispatched the unbroken clause the same hour. Accord status verified. I had not known anyone was verifying it. I had not known there was a process for verifying it. But there it was in the log, 307 years of it. The relay checking every 6 months whether the accord signatories were still listed, whether the queue was still active, whether the protocol still applied. We had built a beacon and forgotten it. They had built a relay and kept checking it. I spent the rest of the morning and most of the afternoon composing the report I would have to file with the Office of External Relations. It was a complicated report. It required explaining that a dormant, unabated system had made first contact with a civilization we had not formally spoken to in 3 centuries, that the contact had been prompted by a distress signal for a crisis that had ended before the current continuance existed, and that the civilization in question had responded by sending a ship anyway, in accordance with a protocol neither of us had thought to dissolve. It required recommending a course of action, and I found I was not sure what course of action to recommend because the situation did not fit any category I knew. Warrant Officer Anand hailed again in the late afternoon when the dome light had turned fully gold and the archive shadows had gone long and soft. She said they had completed their assessment, that the completion report was filed, that the relay queue was now closed. She said her orders were to return to the sector patrol route and that she would be departing within the hour. I asked if she wanted anything. It seemed inadequate, but I could not think of what else to offer. The log update is enough, she said. The relay needed a completion entry. It had been waiting. She paused, and I had the sense she was looking at something on her end. The planet below, maybe. Or the city grid, she had said, looked intact. Or something on her own instruments I would never see. 307 years is a long time. A queue open, she said. But that's what the protocol says to do. I sat with that for a moment after the channel closed. The dome light finished its long move toward evening, and the archive climate system began its evening cycle. And I listened to the hum of it and thought about timers. About the things you set running and then forget, and the things that run anyway and the different kinds of memory. The kind that lives in people, fails, and the kind that lives in protocol, which does not. And what it means when the second kind outlasts the first by 3 centuries and, still, without ceremony or complaint, does exactly what it was built to do. I finished my report at 7:30. In the recommendations section, I wrote that the continuance should formally verify the mutual aid accord's current status, that we should assess our remaining pre-collapse relay infrastructure for any other active timers, and that we should consider re-establishing direct communication with Earth at the earliest practical opportunity. In the notes field, which was optional, and which no one in external relations would read, I wrote, "They kept the relay on." That was all I could think to say. It seemed, somehow, like enough.